Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 119th chapter in the book of Psalms. This will be the 9th of an 11th part series. The 119th Psalm is the single longest chapter in either testament. It's 176 verses, and the way that it is organized is in the poetic form of an acrostic. So there are stanzas of 8, each of which begin with a certain letter in the Hebrew alphabet in the order in which they appear, and that happens 22 times. So 8 stanzas, each letter in the Hebrew alphabet gets 8 verses, and it's basically a love ballad to the law. Now, I know when we New Testament Christians look at the law, we just think it's rules and rules and rules, but it's actually a beautiful thing when we understand it as a witness of the nature and reflection. It has a perfect symmetry which eludes us. So I think the mentality is that we tend to look at the law and think of legalism and we're above it all, but try and have the same devotion that the psalmist had. The law was an object of passion and study and love and just devotion and praise, and he really expresses it start to finish, and it is a beautiful thing. Beautiful words. The law itself is beautiful, and the psalmist has an eloquent praise. So the range we most recently covered was verses 113 to 128. The range we're going to cover today is 129 to 146 or thereabouts. But the letters that we most recently, in the verses 112 through 119, corresponds to the Hebrew letter Samek, and we're just going to read some of those, beginning with 116. Support me according to your word, that I might live, and do not put me to shame because of my hope. The psalmist was surrounded by persecution. He was no alien and stranger to official state-sanctioned persecution, and he finds comfort and relief in the Elohim of the law and in the law of Elohim. And the hope is the one thing that none of our enemies can take away from us. So you have to cling to that at all hazard and health in the spiritual battle and warfare out there. Sustain me that I might be saved, and look to your laws. So the law is not our salvation, but the one that the law points to and emanates from is certainly the source of our salvation. The law is likened to a schoolmaster. It's a halfway house, which is not sufficient for our salvation, but it is still necessary to obey, study, and reflect upon. My flesh has trembled for fear of you. I am in awe of your judgments. This psalmist body's quakes at the mere thought and just the idea, and let alone the presence and manifestation of himself as is revealed in his judgment. So the psalmist read the judgment, and he saw the hand and the finger and the eye of the Almighty. And we have to look at the law the same way. Everything in this word, from Genesis to Revelation, God is trying to speak to you. And if you want to hear him, you have to pray for it. Always pray for the encounter when you study the scripture. Verse 123, my eyes have pined away for your salvation and for the word of your righteousness. Pined away, that's the third time he's used that in recent memory. It's just a yearning after. It's an exhaustion of energy. Pining, there's an element of just all day, perpetuity. And he looks for his salvation. The salvation is his comfort and relief in a stressing environment. And the word is we witness his righteousness in the perfect righteousness that is expressed in the law. So we look at it as a bunch of rules, and we're human, we're frail, we're imperfect. We don't like being told what to do, but it is a beautiful thing to behold as a reflection of the one we are to emulate. 124. Do your servant according to your kindness, and teach me your laws. So he has the mentality of a servant and a student. He was not only a teacher of a law, a singer of the law. This psalm, unlike the majority of the psalms, is meant to be read as opposed to sung. So this is best read and meditated on. It's just a doctrinally sophisticated, systematic presentation in the law in its whole. And he says I am your servant, make me understand that I might know your witnesses. So even though he is the student, he is also the servant as well. So everything he learns is so that he can better obey the master. That is the essence and the dynamic we have to look for in the disciple-master relationship. Therefore I have loved your commandments more than gold, even fine gold. All the gold in the world cannot distract the psalmist from the apple of his eye, which is the law of Yahweh. He loves it. This is a love ballad. This is a love song. He's singing his praises and hosannas and his hallelujahs to the law, what it does for him, how it helps him. It gives him perspective and guidance and hope just in all these situations and all these dilemmas beyond the circumstances are beyond his power to control. But in the law, he has a witness of perfection in its totality, and divinity is present in the law itself. That does not mean we should look to the law for our salvation. We should look to the one to whom the law points to and emanates from. So the legalistic, they get lost in the route to salvation because they get wrapped in the mentality of just incurring indebtedness to Yahweh, which effectively nullifies his grace, and we Christians know better than that, or should. Verse 129, this corresponds with the Hebrew letter Pei. This is the lesson itself. Your witnesses are wonders, so my soul observes them. His motivation for serving and honoring and obeying and teaching and learning and everything else that he did for this laws was because they were a wonder to behold. They are a source of wonder. They are a miracle in themselves. They point of miracles. And the writing of this, just that it came from the pen of man, but from the heart and mind of divinity, is a miracle itself. So this is a wonderful thing to behold. And we can also approach the psalmist. He also writes of his love for the word, and the law is just the more frequent thing that he mentions, but it's also, the word. And his witnesses, this is one of the 8, he uses about 8 synonyms that are derivative or related to the law, and witnesses is one of them. So the witness of Scripture is a witness of who Yahweh is, and it's from reliable witnesses. Our witnesses are enhanced secondhand through the testimony of men who we accept by faith to be honest, accurate, reliable, and true. And that's why he obeys them. He does not obey them out of a cringing fear of punishment, but because he genuinely delights to and wants to. He knows the blessing of the experience of the life of obedience, and he can relate. Maybe he had a born again experience where he was younger and he was enwrapped in sin, and he knows the difference and he appreciates that. So from the awareness, now this stanza, this 8-letter verse, begins with wonders and it ends with the psalmist in tears, and the whole emotional spectrum and range can be found in the Psalms from start to finish. There are every human emotion. It's a lot of these psalmist words can be interpreted as doubtful, but they are honest. They are men in sometimes in emergency situations saying things that we can look at from an objective, impartial distance, but and criticize, but not for them. The opening of your words gives light, giving understanding to the simple. Light is analogous to direction. It requires a compass and a navigator, and these are the tools and the equipment which gives us the light to progress on stay on the straight and narrow and avoid the bumps and speed falls and traps and snares and side roads and detours on the broad and narrow road to destruction. So the light is critical and essential for guidance and perspective. It gives us those two elements, the light, which is a physical metaphor for an intellectual quality, giving understanding to the simple. So there is hope for the simple. There is no hope for the fool. And there are 3 characters of people as exposed in Old Testament wisdom literature: the simple, the scoffer, and the fool. And these are introduced in the first chapter of Proverbs, just to give so the simple, from the foundation, the simple can be made wise. They're not ignorant. They just they don't lack potential. They just lack fulfillment. So from the foundation of a simple mind can become more layers, but a scoffer is one who is set in their ways. They're the ones who treat trivially that which they ought to treat seriously. So they look at the law and they disdain it and ridicule it and reject it and despise it. And then there's the fool, and there's, more hope. There's no hope for the fool, but there is hope for the simple. And this echoes the words of David in the 19th Psalm. He says the same thing in reference to the law, and we don't know the identity of this author. I'm personally partial to the possibility that it was Ezra, but I have no way of proving that. But he would have been familiar with the writings of David. This is a post-exilic psalm, so it would have been dated later. I have opened my mouth and panted, for I have longed for your commands. This also has a precedent in the 42nd Psalm. I believe that was written by one of the sons of Korah, which may or may not have been post-exilic. There's a whole range in that family. But anyway, he compares himself to a deer panting for water, and the water is something we consume. So if we live on this word, we learn from it, we digest from it, we study it, we extract it, we engage it, we let it become a part of our fiber in our beings by obeying it and reading it and studying it and meditating on it and just living it out in every way, shape, and form. And we have to long for it the same way that a thirsty deer would long for, as the hart panteth for the water, so too doth my heart pant for thee. So we have to have the appetite which can be satisfied at the source, and we have to seek the source and be still and know that he is. And when we seek, knock and it will be opened, and ask and it shall be answered. Turn to me and show me grace according to your justice towards those who love your name. So he's asking not an unrighteous or unreasonable request. Grace is something none of us can live without, but something none of us deserve. And without grace and apart from grace, our lives are meaningless, empty, and worthless. So grace is the one thing we don't deserve, one thing we can't live without. And it's absolutely essential for our salvation. And we have the guidelines of the judgments and the standards of the old. And I know one way of looking at it is just rules on rules and rules, but it's also another way of looking at it is just seeing divinity himself in those rules. And love of the name, this is the third commandment. The opposite of the sin of blasphemy is the reverence for the name. It's one who meditates on the name, prays in the name, and does things for the kingdom of the namesake. So we who bear the name also bear the burden, and it's a privilege and a responsibility. There are consequences and no shortcuts to the path that we are called on. Establish my footsteps by your word, and let no wickedness have rule over me. He's praying for a conquered scenario in the battle of good and evil, which rages around us and within every one of us. So within the cosmic struggle of good and evil exists a microcosm in every human being with a soul and a spirit. And so he's praying for the triumph over the forces of wickedness. We don't have to provoke wickedness. Wickedness will provoke us, preemptively without, we're in the path of non-retaliation. The world is wicked, and they like to, take advantage of people like us. But, the victory, Satan is already a defeated foe, and if you are a Christian, you are already a winner, and this message and this faith can turn losers into winners and winners into losers, because what do we read? The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Redeem me from the oppression of man, that I might keep your orders. Redeem is synonymous with salvation, so but he's speaking of the temporal and the immediate oppression, the very powerful presence, of physical oppression of man. He was at the mercy of princes, and he was persecuted by princes, he indicates in a later verse. So he was no alien or stranger to official state-sanctioned persecution. So the oppression of man was not an abstraction to him. He was paying the price for his fastidious adherence in love, loyalty, adoration, and affection for the law. And that was the reason that he was persecuted. But even when he was persecuted, he found strength, solace, comfort, and relief, and victory in the law, in the word. Make your face shine upon your servant, and teach me your laws. For his face to shine upon anything means for his blessings to come down, and the law of gravity is that when the praises go up, the blessings come down. So if you are forever grateful, you will never relapse. If you are grateful to be born again and saved, and you are don't lose sight of the fact. Gratitude is a key element in the Christian life, because even though the Father makes his sun to shine and rain to pour indiscriminately on the just and the just alike, the righteous are grateful for the giver, whereas the wicked are at best grateful for the gift. They don't have the element of attitude of gratitude. But we have nothing. We literally do not have enough hours in the day to praise Yahweh for all he is and all that he does. So the blessed, we owe it to him to bless him, so that the praise go up, so the blessings can come down, and his face will shine across us and mark our way. And teach me your laws now. The laws are so counterintuitive to the natural man's natural state of mind that they require instructions and tutorage and tutelage and education and instruction and scholarship and everything else. This is complex stuff. The law, it is not for lightweights, and the psalmist certainly was not one. He was able to teach because he was teachable, so woe unto this teacher who ceases to become a student. Streams of water have run down from my eyes because they did not keep your Torah. So this stanza opens with wonders and closes in tears. So therein we witness the full range of experience and emotion. He's crying because the whole world around him is alienated and estranged from the word and the author of the word. So that, the Jews, they had the law and they were to live by it, but most of them did not. They were a hard-hearted and rebellious nation from the get-go, but there was a righteous remnant among them, and the psalmist was certainly part of that category. So what makes one laugh and what makes one cry is often the best, most reliable barometer of the test of character. Now, those who take things petty and personally lack either culture or education or manners or anything else like that. So we have to cry for the right things. Don't cry because you lost you're something, someone. It's okay to cry for that, but something, get your pride. Don't mourn over stuff that that can corrupt and corrode and be eaten by moths. So always obey, keep the law, even though the whole world is not. This is the second half of the lesson. We've been doing these in ranges of 16 verses, combining 2 stanzas, 2 letters at a time. So this is the 9th of the 11th. And this one begins with the 137th verse. Righteous are you, O Yahweh, and your judgments are straight. So this can be noticed and extracted from even a cursory examination of the law. There is a consistency and narrowness that is completely correct and completely straight and completely righteous. And his judgments are a reflection of his righteousness. His righteousness is embedded in his judgments, which are written by witnesses for a recording and a revelation. The wise among us will recognize it for what it is and who it is pointing to. You have commanded your witnesses in righteousness and much truth. So there's no taint of blemish or blame from the psalmist to Yahweh with any ulterior or hypocritical or devious motives. In righteousness and much truth, not just truth, but the whole enchilada. He is truth personified. And this is reflected in his commandments and witnesses, which are true. The commandments are true because the witnesses are true. So the human witnesses whose witnesses we sort of piggyback off of when we read the Bible and come to a faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. My ardor has consumed me, for my adversaries had forgotten your words. So he's feeling depleted and not quite defeated, but he's exhausted and he's at the door. He's ready to throw in the towel. He feels beaten up, just by his own zeal. So he was zealous for the right things. He was zealous for the law. He was zealous for Yahweh. And, but, it's just exhausting to put every effort and ounce into the path of obedience while the whole world, his enemies, who are inflicting harm against him, have departed from the words. This was a law given to Israel, his own brethren, his own people, were doing this. So that is why his ardor and zeal, alternately translated, had worn him down and beaten him up, and he was ready to give up. Your word is exceedingly refined, and your servant has loved it. I believe elsewhere it is refined 7 times, likened to the silver process, so that number 7 is indicative of perfection and divinity, but that's actually not exactly here. He says it's just exceedingly refined, so 7 times over is a numerical range, or if not reference. And this is his love ballad to the word. He loves the word and everything about it and everything to it. And once more, he is a servant of it, and he's also a student and a teacher. So remember these things. I am small and despised. I have not forgotten your orders. So he does not let a little thing like the fact that he is not prosperous in the way he is not popular, he is despised and weak and insignificant, and perhaps in human or social society, but he can point with pride and delight to the fact that he has not forsaken and not given up on his orders. His orders are his directives. That's another word for commandments. It's one of the synonyms, one of the 8 ones. So orders is something that he tells us to do. And the things that he tells us to do are most of the time things we don't want to do, and therein lies the challenge and the difficulty, but also the blessing, and the blessing can only come from the embracing of the challenge. Your righteousness is righteousness forever, and your Torah is truth. So it's not righteous today and then it vanishes away and goes away the next day. It was righteous from the beginning, before the beginning, all the way to the end. It is a connection to the eternal one. He is eternally righteous in all his attributes. So he who is eternal is everything else he is eternally so, and because he is righteous, he is eternally righteous. And the truth is unchanging, so 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4, no matter what. That's been the way from the beginning of time. It'll be the same in the year 3000, if we even make it that far. We don't know when the second coming is going to happen, but, get ready for it. We should be praying for it fervently. Distress and anguish have found me. Your commandments are my delight. There's a contrast between the negative and the positive. The psalmist is overwhelmed by distress and anguish, 2 negative emotions, 2 dejected state of minds, 2 unenviable experiential scenarios, and it has found him, and they won't let him go. So they have grabbed him and seized him. They found out where he was hiding, took him, grabbed him, seized him, and found him. But even when he was being strangled by distress and anguish, 2 unpleasant things, he found pleasure and comfort and relief and delight in the commandments, the orders, just the revelation, him talking. The law is the word, is him talking to him, the psalmist, and also talking to us. So the psalmist, much of the psalm is derivative of the law of Moses, and it wouldn't be there, but there's still, the language is original. Distress, the 144th and final verse. The righteousness of your witnesses is forever. Make me understand that I might live. The attribute of eternality is essential in the maintenance of a proper perspective of who divinity is. If you believe Genesis 1:1, it will not be terribly difficult to believe everything else. That's the foundation. That's what, the test of faith really lies in that question, but so his righteousness is forever because he is righteous, and he is from forever, and he is from the beginning, in the beginning, and before the beginning, and all the way to the time. He is omnipresent across time. His omnipresence extends both across space as well as time. So that means he's every time at once. He's past, present, and future all at once. He views and experiences time from a panoramic view. He is not in any way confined by it, but he transcends it, and he is not controlled by it, but he's in control of it. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.